All right, this is BIOS. We're hearing the stories from our church and our members, and thank you as representing our youth coming to share your stories. So if you want to just share your name and how long you've been part of this church community.
I'm Gracie. I've been a part of this community since I was born, so I've grown up in this community.
I'm Mikayla. I've been here for about 11 years.
I'm Mia. I've been here since creator role. I grew up in Adventurers, and I was part of the church's children's choir, led by Miss Leilani at the time.
Nice.
I'm Zinnia. I've been here since I was like 8 or 9.
Okay, awesome. We'll get right into it. This is AAPI Heritage Month, and so we're focusing on the Asian Americans in our community and also the Pacific Islanders in our community. And so what do you all celebrate about being Asian or Asian American in the circles that you're in, at school, at church, or wherever you find yourself? What do you celebrate about being Asian American?
Usually food, we have lots of varieties. The food is delicious. We love to share. We love to share our food together. So.
Yeah. Every time you're at an Asian household, they always make sure you're fed.
Exactly.
And you gotta take home food or something. But
you can't say no to the food. That's
You can't say
disrespectful.
no.
Come on now.
I also think some of the practices, like taking your shoes off in the house, respecting your elders, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, I haven't celebrated anything about my Asian heritage in a while. Maybe, I feel like when I first came here, Chinese New Year, was really important. It was more important than Christmas. I feel like that's about it, that I remember, of course. I bet there's a lot of history behind my culture, but I've been Americanized.
What has it meant for you to be Asian in your communities? What does that mean to you? What are the expectations that come from people? What is that for you all?
For me, I'm not just Asian, I'm mixed. So it's different when you have a very, very small portion of your school, your friends being not Asian, outside of church. So it can be kind of challenging. And when you find somebody who's just like you get really excited because you're oh my goodness, there's more of me. I'm not just alone all the time, which is really cool. And it's not necessarily that I don't find joy in learning about other people's diversity. It is really fun, but sometimes it can get kind of lonely when you can't talk about the things that you get to talk about at home or with your other Asian American friends.
Obviously, being Asian for me comes with the expectations that I have to be smart. That was the main problem for me when I was younger, because I was pretty smart and everyone just assumed that I was this person full of knowledge, but I wasn't, and that really, what is the word? It was a lot of pressure, and definitely being good at something other, piano or violin, being good at an instrument. Oh my goodness, I don't know how many times people have asked me, do you play piano? Do I? Oh no! Do you play piano? I don't know.
For me, I think being Asian in my community, especially at school, isn't something that's too significant. I go to Loma Linda Academy, so I think maybe 65% of the students there are Asian, and among that group, I think the two major groups are Korean and Filipino. So it's easy to feel you belong because you share that the same culture as students, but then again it's just oh, okay, just another Asian student.
For me, I think my school has about 20, has a 20% population, of Asians. So, but whenever I meet another fellow Asian American, they're usually very in touch with their culture, and they they go home every year or so. But for me, I don't know, whenever I go home, I'm just kind of I don't know, feel kind of left out because, I grew up in America and I don't have the same experiences as my cousins who grew up in the Philippines. And I just, it can be very confusing where to put, to like identify myself as.
Which kind of leads, and those are really powerful answers, which leads to the next question is, like, what is like a negative experience that comes out of having your culture and your heritage that you've experienced just day to day, or that kind of, if you want to dive deeper into the pressures and expectations?
Mine is pretty surface leveled. Mine is just like about my name, like when I was younger, like, my name's Jayu, and like, Caillou, right? The bald little dude? Yes. When I was like in like the 4th or 5th grade, my classmates found out my name, well, they knew my name was Jayu. They started calling me Caillou because I was bald, and that did not make me feel really good. I did not want to be compared to this little egg looking. So that really made me really insecure, and now I'm kind of like really like hesitant on using my name Jayu because of that. Like, I know I was born with it, but it doesn't feel like it's my name,
I think some of the expectations that have been placed onto me are like getting good grades, excelling musically. I think at a young age, my grandparents were very like
Persistent?
Yeah, I guess persistent at getting my sister and I into music. So like at 2, they gave me a violin.
Oh my goodness.
And then they gifted my sister and I like a grand piano, but like none of us play. But yeah, I think music is something that has been expected for me to excel at.
I also agree with Mia, like the music aspect. I started learning piano when I was like 4, and my mom started teaching me piano. I ended up like really hating it for like multiple reasons, because I guess it was just forced onto me a lot, and I just didn't really like it that much. But also another aspect of like people, like a negative experience would be when I was younger, especially in elementary school, like a core memory is being made fun of for the food that I ate, the Asian food that I took to school. People would be like, oh, that's gross, like why would you eat that? Or they would say, why does it look like that? Why does it smell like that? And like me being super shy as like an elementary school kid, like the one kid who had like a book always and like would read books all the time, who wouldn't talk to very many people, and like just be called out in front of everybody being told, ew, that's disgusting, just because I might have eaten different food because of my mother's culture.
So one time I was in elementary school, unpacking my lunch bag, and then this kid next to me notices my food, and they were like, oh, what? That's some interesting food you got there. Obviously, they didn't really say that, but they made some weird comments about my food. And I was like, oh. So then I started like bringing non-Asian food and like sandwiches and stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just, whenever I just like, brought food from home in elementary school, I would always like be embarrassed.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I'll share that story too. And I even think of like, Zinnia, I even feel bad calling you Zinnia now just from you saying that story. But it's like, there's pieces of us, especially when we're around people who don't look like us, that we feel like we have to give up so that we can feel safer or maybe survive kind of, or navigate through. And that's like a real thing that happens to minority groups. And constantly, there's like a piece of us that like we hold back on or bring down, or there's pressures that come from our families. And I think it exists because they want to make sure that we have something that we excel in so that we can be more than just a minority. And that's a real thing that happens.
I'm second generation because my mom grew up and was raised in the Philippines, and then she moved here. And then she had my brother and I. So it's also been different for me because my family's mixed, right? So on my brother, me and my brother, we never like necessarily fit in anywhere because whenever we're on like with my mom's side of the family, we're always lighter than everybody else. But then when I'm with my dad's side of the family, we're darker than everybody else. So we're kind of like in the middle. We're kind of like that gradient that like is just kind of there. And sometimes it can feel a little lonely, but then again, it's like, okay, well, I'm different, and so that can be cool too. So.
I'm third generation. So to me, being third generation is something that's a little sad, I think. All the people I know, like all my friends, they're all second generation. And so they're somewhat more connected to their culture than I am. So like at school, all my friends like speak Tagalog, they understand Tagalog. So I feel like I'm a little bit disconnected from my culture.
I'm second generation. My parents came from the Philippines a long time ago. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, when I was still like kind of learning Tagalog, but like, you know, I couldn't really understand most of it. So whenever I went home back to the Philippines, I could not communicate with my cousins. It was so like, I don't know. I felt really bad for them because I felt like it was a chore for them to just try and talk to me. And like, you know, it would be like really awkward because I would be like, what? And then they'd like try and show me, and then I wouldn't know because I was like 7, you know?
And I think about like how generations affect. Like I'm a second generation. Like my parents immigrated to Canada, and like I learned the language I speak from my parents because I would listen to them. They never tried to teach it to me, but I would listen to them talk, right? Yeah, and I'd hear them pick up things, and I mean, I've never really had to talk to anyone in my language, really. Like I never have to have a conversation. And so sometimes I think about like, will I teach my kids the language? And when they're going to be third generation kids, and it's like, how applicable will it be? Like, what's the point? I mean, and then it's like, yeah, it's a piece of me, but it's like, what's still the reason for me to try and like be like, hey, stop, listen to these words when they're like, they never are going to talk to anybody else with it. And so, yeah, that kind of thinks about like in a community where my parents came from, where that's all they would talk. In a world now I live in, where no one talks like that, what's the point? And I have to think about that and choose that too.
That was what my mom had to go through because my dad is American. So when my mom came here, she didn't have anybody to speak Tagalog to. So and when she met my dad and had my brother and I, there was no one to talk to. And there was no point for my brother and I to learn because my dad can't understand Tagalog. So like the only places I would hear Tagalog is like growing up and going to Filipino parties, and I would never understand a word. Like sometimes even now, like I don't know half of what they're talking about, but a lot of times there's English mixed in to Tagalog, and so I can understand based on like the bits and pieces of English, based on like the topic of the conversation, but I won't understand like the actual language itself of Tagalog, which is really interesting.
What do you wish people would know, or how do you think people where do you think people need to start if they want to be more aware to the Asian American experience, the Asian experience of people in America, to be more loving and to be much more empathetic and open?
Other people should just be normal like they are and not try to, like, every time talk to me, feel like they're being oversensitive or oversensitively talk to me, you know?
Okay.
Because that would make me feel really bad if every time you talk to me, you pity me, you know? But just be aware, but also don't be over aware.
Okay, no, that's really good.
Respecting and being respectful to everybody. I'm not saying nobody's respectful, but I'm saying like be mindful that people are different and don't be angry or like come off as like an offensive way. Like when I said, oh my goodness, ew, the food, like when people say that, I understand that it is something different, but there are different ways to ask people what that is instead of saying, oh, I'm interested, can you explain what that is to me, instead of verbally like diminishing me in front of a whole group of people or another group of people. And people should be more empathetic in a way because everybody grows up with a different background.
I think just what Gracie said, just to be a little bit more open-minded and more willing to talk about things or just ask. I guess.
Asking questions nicely and, respectfully, that really helps. Because I feel like if you're just like, oh, what are you? Like, it's just like,
Where you from?
where are you really from?
Who are you?
Yeah, it's just weird. So,
And that's really huge. I love that, the common theme is just asking, also being aware. Because like, when people ask like, where are you from? They're implying that you can't be from here, right? And the reality is, all 4 of you have lived here for a long time. Whether you were born here or not, lived here for a long time. And so you are, like, part of who you are is being here. And so no one should just come up and just act like oh, you can't be from here. But that's a reality of what we face. And so appreciate all 4 of you coming and sharing your experience and your stories, representing our youth group here as well. And we look forward to just creating spaces where more of our youth can also step up to share their experience. So thank you for sharing your story for BIOS, for our church.